Verstappen's perfect weekend at the United States Grand Prix was the turning point in what could be Formula One's greatest ever comeback. While any driver can win any F1 race, the battle for the sport's greatest prize, the World Drivers' Championship, is normally pretty straightforward. There might be a couple of teams who are fighting for race wins at the start of the season or even sometimes for the majority of the season. But normally, by the time we get to the last 5 races or so in the season, the Drivers' Championship is all but decided. One driver will just be too fast. Their team will have outdeveloped their opponents, their car will be too strong, and the title winner will be a foregone conclusion. It is very rare that we see a driver come from behind in the Drivers' Championship to win. However, this season, Max Verstappen looks to be on his way to do just that. And if he pulls it off, it will probably be the greatest comeback in F1 history, and a performance that will cement his place among F1's greats. But how does it actually rank among F1's greatest ever comebacks? And how on earth has he managed to pull this off? Well, let's check it out. Before the cars hit the track at the Circuit of the Americas, Max Verstappen's title chances were beyond distant. He was 63 points behind leader Oscar Piastri with 6 race weekends remaining. That meant he needed to secure over 10 points per race more than Piastri to take the World Drivers' Championship. Even with the 3 sprint races that are thrown into the mix, that seemed like a very tall order. In a normal season, with any other driver to be honest, that would have been a gap too big to overcome, but this is Max Verstappen, and in recent seasons, he has proved time and again that he's capable of feats that should be impossible for most other drivers. After McLaren's frankly disaster of a weekend in Austin, Verstappen is once again making the impossible look possible. He took a maximum of 33 points from the sprint weekend, while championship leader Oscar Piastri could only manage 10 and his teammate Lando Norris 18. Max now sits just 40 points behind Piastri and 26 behind Norris. Over the last 5 race weekends, Verstappen has gained 57 points on Piastri. With 5 Grand Prix and 2 sprint races remaining, that 40-point buffer that Oscar has is not looking very big at all, especially when it's an informed Max Verstappen that the 2 McLaren drivers are having to face. But before I get too carried away with comparisons and the talk of the greatest season of all time, how is he managing to pull off this comeback that history tells us should really be impossible? Well, let's start off by going back 5 races to the Dutch Grand Prix, where something momentous happened at Red Bull. At that race, Verstappen finished second behind Oscar Piastri, whose win extended his lead over Verstappen to 104 points. With 9 races left after that probably should have meant that Verstappen was out of the Drivers' Championship, leaving Piastri with just his teammate left for competition. Over the previous 7 races before the Dutch Grand Prix, Verstappen had only managed to get onto the podium once, but from the Dutch Grand Prix onwards, he hasn't finished lower than second. The McLaren car hasn't suddenly gotten slower. They haven't made some horrible mistake and forgotten how to make the car fast with the setup. Verstappen hasn't all of a sudden decided to start trying harder either. No, what has changed is that Red Bull have brought upgrades, and all of them have been focused around the front wing. At Zandvoort, the front wing got a small adjustment. Longer chord front flaps on the front wing were implemented to, as per the FIA's upgrade sheet, increase the load available via angle to tackle the expected demands of the Zandvoort circuit. Now, Zandvoort is a very high downforce circuit, so it isn't surprising to see a change in front wing for it. But Red Bull were the only one of the top 4 teams to bring changes to the track. That was a sign of something very important, but I'll come back to that in a second. If you go back 2 races earlier, to the Belgian Grand Prix, you'll find the point where Red Bull's turnaround really began. The team brought its most significant upgrade package of the 2025 season to that race. The engineering work was absolutely massive, like this was a genuine aerodynamic overhaul. The new package affected multiple areas of the car, and it was installed on both Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda's car. The key changes included a new nose cone, there was a redesign to its outer shell, and there was also a reworked front wing. Now, the front wing is the most important aerodynamic component on the car. It shapes the air that then travels over every other part of the car, meaning it defines how the rest of your car looks. The upgrades also included new side pod inlets. Now, these updates worked hand in hand with the revised front suspension covers and a new engine cover as well. In terms of a mid-season upgrade for a car, this was as big as they come. And for Red Bull to do it at the Belgian Grand Prix, with just 12 races left for this generation of cars, it was a huge gamble. Now, it didn't pay off instantly, but Formula 1 went on its summer break after the Hungarian Grand Prix, and Red Bull had a chance to go away, work out how their new package was meant to operate, and they came back stronger. Since the summer break, Verstappen has been the best driver on the grid. He's outscored every other car, and honestly, it isn't even close. Now, Red Bull weren't done with that Belgian Grand Prix upgrade package. They carried on adding to it, and in Monza there was a new floor, and then finally in Singapore there was an updated front wing. Now, Red Bull have confirmed that that Singapore front wing is now the last upgrade for the car this season. What Red Bull have done, which has made Verstappen's comeback possible, is they've continued upgrading their car far longer than McLaren has. Now, the last serious upgrade that McLaren brought was to the Austrian Grand Prix, and that was just minor changes to their front suspension and some slightly more significant changes to their rear suspension. They followed that up with a change of floor at the British Grand Prix and some track-specific changes at Monza, but none of these changes are on the level of what Red Bull had been doing. Now, McLaren's in action, which is what it is. It's their inaction that has now opened the door for Mercedes and Ferrari to catch up in terms of performance, but crucially, it has allowed Red Bull to improve their car to the point where, in the hands of Verstappen at least, it is now the best car on the grid. And this newfound performance advantage that Red Bull and Verstappen have isn't going to fade away anytime soon. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella has confirmed that the team won't be bringing any new parts to their car, so the McLaren drivers just have to make the most of what they have now. So with McLaren not improving and not going to improve at any point, and the Red Bull car appearing to be the superior of the two, it is now all about damage limitation for McLaren as Piastri or Norris try to hold on to the World Drivers' Championship. Of course, there are still 5 races left in the season, and Verstappen has a lot of points to make up to Piastri if he wants to secure an incredible and completely unlikely 5th World Drivers' Championship. But honestly, if he pulls it off, it might be the best of the lot so far. But before I get into that, if you're enjoying the video and you want to catch more news and analysis on Formula 1, then make sure to go down below, press the like button, and subscribe to F1 Reverse. Thanks a lot. Like I said earlier in the video, Formula 1 Championship comebacks tend to be few and far between, and even when they do happen, the points deficits that are overturned aren't always that large, really. The biggest the gap got between Verstappen and Piastri was 104 points, and that was after the Dutch Grand Prix. That left Verstappen with 9 races to overturn Oscar's lead, needing to score 12 points more than his title rival per Grand Prix for the rest of the season. Baku helped Verstappen a lot. With Piastri retiring from the race, Max closed the gap to 69 points with just 7 races remaining, and that brought his required points per race more than Piastri down to 10. Now, 2 races later, with just 5 more Grand Prix weekends in the season, the gap is down to 40 points, and Max needs just 8 points per weekend more than Oscar to draw the championship, forcing a tiebreaker based on race wins. And now if you take those numbers and you compare them to the other great comebacks of the modern point-scoring era, which is an era where drivers have been taking 25 points for a race win, Verstappen's is by far going to be the most impressive. In 2012, after dominating 2011, Sebastian Vettel was made to sweat a little for his 3rd of 4 consecutive championships. Halfway through the 20-race season, he was 3rd in the championship, 2 points down on teammate Mark Webber, but a hefty 44 behind Fernando Alonso, who, at this stage, looked destined to become a Ferrari champion. Instead, Alonso's season stalled, and a sensational run of 4 consecutive wins in Singapore, Japan, Korea, and then India lifted Vettel into the lead. But the Asian swing wasn't the end of that story. In one of F1's most dramatic final races, Vettel was forced to return to comeback mode. Dropping into the midfield in Brazil after a really poor start from 4th on the grid, Vettel was forced to pit with damage after a pretty hefty whack from Bruno Senna's Williams. In really tricky mixed conditions, somehow Vettel managed to dig deep and his hold car held together long enough for him to finish in 6th position, with Alonso an agonising 2nd to Jenson Button's McLaren. Vettel was champion again by 3 points. It's still remembered as one of the great F1 comebacks, but in comparison to what Verstappen is on the cusp of pulling off, Vettel's comeback was a breeze. Seb had a 44-point gap to close in 10 races. Verstappen has to do the same thing in 5. Prior to that, and heading into the older point scoring system, one of the most fondly remembered comebacks was that of Kimi Raikkonen in 2007. Now, I am a massive Raikkonen fan, and this season in particular is definitely one of my favourites if you want to go back and watch one at some point during the winter break. Now, most of this season centred on the McLaren drivers of Fernando Alonso and the, at the time, rookie Lewis Hamilton. Now, after round 10 of 17, Hamilton and Alonso were separated by just 2 points, with Felipe Massa in 3rd and Raikkonen only 4th, 18 points behind the surprise rookie leader. At the time, the scoring system only gave 10 points for a win, 8 points for 2nd, 6 for 3rd, and then a point less for every position back to 8th. Over rounds 11 and 12, Raikkonen cut the gap by 2 points, leaving him with a deficit of 16 with 5 races remaining. However, as Spygate unravelled, the McLaren drivers capitulated. Hamilton's trip into the gravel while coming into the pits at the penultimate race in China allowed Raikkonen to gain 10 points on the rookie driver. However, going into the last race of the season, he still had a deficit of 7 points to Hamilton. The equivalent in modern F1 of that situation would be needing to win while your opponent finished in 7th place. But that's exactly what Raikkonen did. In Brazil, at the final race of the season, Hamilton again unravelled, racing poorly in the opening exchanges, then suffering gearbox electronics glitch that cost him 30 seconds. Up ahead, Massa moved over to allow Raikkonen to win, lifting him to one of the unlikeliest world titles, 1 point ahead of the tied and hapless McLaren duo. It was an utterly incredible comeback from the Finnish driver, but it is impossible to look past the failures of Hamilton and Alonso, which gifted him the title in the last 2 races. And beyond that, the further back you go, the more the title comebacks tend to rely on rivals' failures rather than individual brilliance. For example, James Hunt's comeback in 1976, which is probably one of the most dramatic and well-known in F1 history. However, he would never have won that title if it wasn't for Niki Lauda's awful accidents at the Nürburgring. John Surtees pulled off a very impressive comeback in 1964 to take the title by 1 point, but was helped by a quirk of the scoring system, which meant the drivers only got points for the best 6 finishes. Also, Lotus apparently forgot how to make a car run an entire race distance after Jim Clark looked utterly dominant over the first half of the season. Another season you'll often hear talked about as one of F1's greatest comebacks is Keke Rosberg's title in 1982. However, he was helped in a very similar way to how James Hunt was when Didier Pironi injured himself badly at the German Grand Prix and didn't compete over the last 5 races of that season. Despite that, Keke still only won the title by 5 points. So if you're looking for a comparison to what Verstappen might manage this season, there really isn't one. Yes, he has been helped by McLaren not upgrading their car, which opened the door for Red Bull to catch, but Piastri and Norris are still competing. Piastri didn't help himself with that poor weekend in Baku or the one he just had in America. Norris's big mistake in Canada or his retirement from Zandvoort could prove critical. But Verstappen has had his own bad luck, getting wiped out by Antonelli in Austria. If he pulls this off, it is going to be on the back of his own fantastic performances and Red Bull's sheer determination to build the fastest car on the grid. And it's just incredible how the two together are managing to extract the absolute maximum from every race weekend. We are, right now, in my opinion, witnessing the greatest comeback in F1 history, and if Verstappen manages to pull it off, it will set a standard that will likely never be matched again. But do you think he can do it? Why don't you let me know in the comments down below, and if you don't think this is going to be the greatest comeback in F1 history, then please, don't at me.